guys. You're very welcome to our Engage People videocast. So I'm delighted to be joined today's session with Joe Emmerson of Holst. Holst provide a range of different services. We've worked with them over the last couple of years. We would use the McQuaig psychometric assessment. I guess the reason we really like McQuaig is, well, first of all, there's 2 or 3 of our clients use it and use it very effectively. So naturally it piqued my interest. And then having worked with our own teams, so I think part of our 2020 sort of strategy was to really build up more of an understanding about our own natural working styles. So we conducted individual McQuaig, it's called a word survey, basically it's a psychometric assessment. And what followed then is we all actually received our own self-development surveys, which gives a very good report about your own natural strengths and then maybe areas of development as well. So I think particularly at the moment, just as we're in lockdown, a lot of people are working from home. Some people are really enjoying it. Some people really miss the office and crave that interaction. So we speak to a lot of people, particularly I guess in the HR world, who are keen to maybe delve a little bit deeper, build a little bit more self-awareness themselves, maybe across their teams. So I start off by asking Jo, first of all, how she's getting on life at her end, and the conversation flows from there. I'm delighted to be joined today by Jo Emmerson. So Jo is, I guess, Jo, we've worked together over the last few years. You obviously run Holst, which I know is in the psychometric testing business. We'll talk a bit about that today. So Jo, we might kick off. We're obviously into the second week of February. How's all at your end?
Yeah, actually, we feel really positive coming into the new year. I think as we start to see the kind of golden nugget of those vaccinations being rolled out, I think it starts to make everybody feel a little bit more reassured, and the nights are kind of less long, Paul. Let's put it that way. So I think the sun's shining today. We're pretty positive. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Good to hear. So I think we often chat and have chatted over the years when it comes to hiring new people and the psychometric assessment side of things, and really looking at different processes and sort of value adds to a typical interview process, so that we can make the best hiring decision for our team, and obviously the best decision for the individuals who we're considering. And obviously we speak to our clients on a fairly regular basis, about psychometric assessment. It was one of the best things actually we did last year. Myself and 1 or 2 of the team, we became qualified obviously in the McQuaig process. We found that really useful, and it's become quite a regular part of our day to day. So we'll talk a little bit about hiring, but maybe we'll talk first of all actually about current team and really looking at working with individuals. So we're in a really, I guess, someone described to me recently as a major human experiment where we all have to work from home, obviously. A lot of people are extremely time poor because they're having to homeschool, or there's other sort of factors to sort of that are on their plate that they wouldn't have had to deal with in the past. Other people have a lot more time in their hands because they're not commuting, they're not traveling for meetings as much. So we'll look back at this time, and I'm sure lots of interesting there'll be lots of interesting nuggets we can take. I guess first things first, from a team perspective, and we talk quite a bit about well-being and psychological safety. Anything maybe as to maybe your own experience over the last sort of 6-12 months, maybe how you found work from home yourself, first of all, and then maybe your own team dynamic would be good to understand.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Paul. And I think you're absolutely right. The term human experiment, it's definitely been that, hasn't it? For me personally, I do have children, and they are at home and need homeschooling. Fortunately, then they're not actually primary school children, and my heart really goes out to those people that are having to homeschool primary school children. That must be really tough. I think from my own personal experience, we're fortunate that our business is really largely based online, and a lot of our training is online, and we've adapted to that well. I think for many businesses, I think if that model has worked well for them, that's great. But I think there are a number of businesses perhaps where that hasn't actually worked for them. And I can imagine, there is a differing view, within my own team. I know the initial kind of home working experience has been a really positive one, and that they've enjoyed being able to set their own timetable, know that they can take time out at lunch and go and walk their dog if they need to. I mean, these pets are so spoiled right now. But as far as the longer it goes on, I think my team particularly miss the social interaction, and I think that's the real challenge. We run an annual meeting at the start of every year, like a kickoff meeting, and that was done online this year. And I think the realization off the back of that was actually we will really miss each other, and what a shame it is that we can't be there face to face, and we look forward to that day. So I think coming back to the personality types, I think often many people need that social interaction, but more than that, they need the support of the team around them. And I think if you're in a role that requires working alongside team members, being creative with your ideas, perhaps being more proactive in your business approach, I think face-to-face working alongside each other in an office is actually quite missed at the moment. But to the same extent, there have definitely been some positives of working from home. Like I said, for me, I find that I once I'm at my desk, I'm much more focused on what I'm doing. There's less distraction. And I think if you've got a role that's largely self-sufficient and that works from home, then it makes absolute sense that people would want to continue to do that. So my only reservation, I guess, is long-term, what the kind of mental well-being of those individuals are when you're isolated. I think isolation can be quite damaging.
Yeah.
Many people maybe live at home on their own, and that can be really hard.
Yeah.
But I think it's really a mixed bag, Paul.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Yeah. And tell me maybe just about the background as to why it was so, and obviously you're experienced in the broader HR arena, and I know you've been working with McQuaig over the last number of years. What was it about the McQuaig testing process that appealed to you, Joe, that you felt you wanted to partner with that specific area?
I suppose, firstly, McQuaig is a quality product. And I think when you are, initially, I came into this particular company commercially, and it's important that you believe in the product you're selling. And I absolutely do. But I think what McQuaig does really, really well is focus on the individual, helps them to understand themselves better, helps people who are working with them, managing them, to understand the individual better, how that person likes to work, how to get the best out of that person. And then beyond that, helps people understand each other better as teams. How do you work effectively alongside each other?
Yeah.
How can you identify, potential areas of conflict even through this? It's really a very supportive tool throughout that entire employee life cycle.
Yeah, very good. And just in relation to, maybe a current team, because I think, when we were chatting briefly about this beforehand, but maybe what's coming down the line, and as you say, and I speak to lots of different businesses. There would have been some very traditional business owners who may, in the past, not have been up for, the team having access to work from home, and obviously, things have changed significantly in that regard. And broadly speaking, it seems to be working well. I think, like you've mentioned there, like, so in terms of like meetups, maybe innovation meetings, getting together, problem solving, there's definitely, a magic that goes with having groups of people together, in the same place, the same time. And I'm not suggesting it's insurmountable to do that, via video conversation, but it would appear it's definitely advantageous to get together from time to time. And then you have, I guess, some people who, some individuals who, really, really embrace being around other people, the energy it gives them, whether that's professionally or personally. And then others maybe who would be, I guess, and I'm not suggesting that they're specifically sort of introverts, but that they may prefer not having the distraction, and being able to get through a lot of work, whether it's detailed work, analysis type work, and I'm just wondering, in your experience then from the testing side of things, is there any particular sort of tips or suggestions maybe you could make to someone who's in a leadership role or HR role to maybe empower their team to, to work better together, to understand what their natural working styles might suit best?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly you know, when you start to understand your individual profile, you can understand actually what your preferences are. And for some people, that can be different from what their preferences are at work as opposed to how they are at home. And of course, now everything is amalgamated and we've suddenly got this work and home life all in one place. And for some people, that will be really great because they will feel that they are managing everything, and actually, like you say, perhaps people aren't having to commute anymore, or there'll be certain advantages for certain people. I think for other profile types, you know, specifically those with a high sociability, people like persuaders or enthusiasts, they really bounce off other people. They really need other people. And I think if you're able to understand what type of profile you are, and the leadership teams are able to help you understand that as well. With McQuaig, we can use something called a self-development survey, which really goes through that, helps you to understand exactly where you are and how you like to work. I think that's a really good place to start. And I think what it will do is open up the doors for good conversational points. You know, are there ways to suit everybody? Are there ways of making sure that everybody gets that social interaction, but you also allow people the space to be able to continue to work from home where appropriate? And you know, Paul, I think, you know, we were discussing this a little bit earlier, but you know, each business is different, and the business objectives for those businesses will all be different. And as a result, it's important that managers really communicate that well and help people to understand what the business requires, and equally that those people working with those managers are able to explain why they feel their role is still working well, and really keep those communication channels open. I think it's very much a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, very good. And one of the piece I noted was that whenever the reports come through, and this is similar across most of the different psychometric assessments, that one might get a report back. What I think works very well from a McQuaig perspective is that you would sit down with the individual, first of all, before jumping to a conclusion, and showing the different scales that exist, maybe between, you know, the sort of the dominance piece, and then maybe the sociability, the, you know, the analysis piece, and maybe seeing where they fit themselves. And you know, you're hoping at that point then that maybe there'll be some consistency, and you know, it can be a progressive conversation. But I think it's good to check back in, obviously, with the individual to see what their sort of views are, and you know, would you find that quicker in terms of that, you know, rather than using the results of the surveys being the be all and end all, you sort of do it in coordination with, you know, asking for feedback from the individual?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, my experience of taking the McQuaig word survey in the same way was very similar. You know, I think when you're giving feedback to somebody, it should be a two-way thing. It should be helping that individual to understand, almost, you know, get them to identify that they are, that is what they're like, that is their profile, that's how they like to work. I think McQuaig is good for giving you the opportunity to explain not only what the traits are, but in essence what that means to that person, and also what it means to the person managing them.
Yeah. And what are you seeing in terms of, you know, support? So from a leadership perspective, so I guess, you know, we're a lot of us are in a situation whereby whether you're, you know, you have 6 months experience or significantly more interacting with your team, whether you're an employer or a manager, what is there a particular sort of focus that you or a particular sort of technique or method that you can suggest from a management perspective as to how to ensure, I guess, they're being supportive with their team members?
Well, firstly, I think managers have a really difficult job. I mean, I think, you know, human beings in themselves aren't very good at change. And generally speaking, in normal change management, there is an opportunity where you get to prepare, and nobody had a chance to prepare at the head of the you know, beginning of this crisis, and certainly nobody expected it to go on quite this long. I think with hindsight we probably realize it's actually a 2-year cycle when you look at other pandemics, but the reality is at the time that wasn't what anyone was expecting. So I think firstly, I think the managers have a really difficult time, really difficult job actually. And so it's about helping them to cope with the changes and helping them to collaborate really well with their team. I think where I've seen success with that communication between leaders and those people working for them is about kind of an open, honest culture, and actually being able to say what they're feeling at that time and feel that they're being listened to. And I think one of the greatest leadership skills you can have is being a good listener. And being able to go away and actually work out why that is important to that individual and what you can help to do to support it.
Yeah. And this isn't something we've spoken about before, but have you found some of the profiles useful maybe to give you maybe a sense as to how well someone is suited to remote working and, you know, being on their own for a significant amount of time? Or would you see that being more individual and maybe separate to what the information and assessment might provide?
Yeah, I think the profiles definitely do give you that indication. I would say that you know, the obvious one is sociability. Anybody who's got a high sociability or anything above the line is to look for that interaction with others and seeks, you know, advice perhaps more often than people who are below the line. But I think then as well, when you start to look at people's independence, those people who are quite independent tend to be also much more comfortable about taking management of their own business objectives, their own roles. So for example, you know, I think they always say that leadership's quite a lonely job, and generally speaking, managers often are quite independent. And I think it's important to spot whether somebody's actually coping well with that, or actually whether they do need a bit more support. Equally, I think if you're naturally quite an analytical person, I think you will be very good at workflows. You'll be very happy as long as the kind of workflows are well constructed. And those people may be more successful at home. So potentially, if you're some kind of online engineer, for example, that may be more straightforward for you. I think depending on what you're used to, salespeople typically need interaction. They like talking with clients, and therefore that will probably be quite hard when all of that's online at the moment. But equally, that may be working well for them. I think you probably need to take it on a case-by-case basis, depending on the role. But certainly, there are aspects you can draw out from the profiles, given the different traits, for sure.
And one of the reasons that why we've been keen to chat to you, Joe, is I guess we've approached the McQuaig assessment from both sides, both with an existing team, you know, with 4 or 5 people who had been, you know, with us for anything up to sort of 4 or 5 years, and then we've brought in some new people as well, and we've used the assessment, and we found it very beneficial. What would you say, maybe if it's someone who's with an existing team and they were looking maybe at introducing a psychometric assessment, you know, to benefit the team and working styles and so forth, what's your advice maybe about how to go about that? Is it typically that one person on the team, maybe in the leadership role, would undergo training to provide the testing to the rest of the team, or how would one go about delivering that?
I think if you're new to McQuaig or you've never used psychometric assessments before, I would definitely recommend that you get somebody trained internally, because I think that will help, particularly with feedback and explaining what you're, you know, the project that you're looking to achieve with the team. I think, again, it's kind of gaining consensus prior to going through it as well. So explaining, gaining an understanding of what you're looking to achieve, and then actually helping individuals to understand that then they're not being assessed negatively. This is a positive psychology, actually. This is let's understand each other better, and let's understand how we can help each other to be more successful. So yes, I think traditionally some psychometric tools may be perceived to be a negative thing, and they're certainly not that. McQuaig certainly isn't that. It's all about understanding the individual, understanding and identifying how that individual likes to work, and then how actually that fits with the rest of the team.
Yeah, very good. And I mean, speaking from a training perspective, so Mike and I obviously conducted the training. I think in sort of two or three parts throughout 2020. I have to say I found it quite enjoyable, you know. And it's funny when you sort of separate 3 hours for training, you're thinking to yourself, you know, it's going to be you listening, but particularly over sort of a Zoom type conversation. But it's very interactive, and I have to say the time flew by. When we were doing it, you know, we certainly found it very interesting. And then maybe from a hiring perspective, and I know there's different viewpoints of this as to when to introduce the assessment, and I like the diagram and how it was described to me, and that, like, I think a CV, when you look at one CV, it can give you, you know, a reasonable amount of information in relation to what someone's done in the past. I think into an interview scenario, you can talk about historically how someone has approached things, reasonably reliable. McQuaig then tends to really sort of peel it back a little bit more in terms of sort of natural working styles and how people are maybe behaving in a sort of in a professional environment, and maybe where the differences are, and maybe gives you further insight and information. In an ideal world, and maybe there's no such thing as an ideal interview process, but how would you run a process that maybe is typically, you know, 2 or 3 interviews? Where would you see the McQuaig process fitting in there?
I think in recruitment, there are a number of different tools that McQuaig can help. I think what we always recommend is using a McQuaig job survey first. That helps to identify specifically about the role, and not just, you know, a salesperson or another salesperson, for example, but specifically what that sales role is that you're recruiting for. And that can be different from
Yeah.
potentially the same role that you were recruiting for last time. You may have identified that that role needs a different type of person to come in. So the job survey is something that typically you would use initially, and what that does is really help you to benchmark the role.
Yeah.
What's great about that is you do get lots of interview questions as part of the report. So that would be what we would recommend to use for first round interviews. For second round interviews, I think at that point is when you would look to use a McQuaig word survey. That will give you an understanding of what that individual brings to the table and how well they match. We can use something called a job fit interview guide, which is a comparison tool between the benchmark that you set, the job survey, and then the candidate profile. And then finally, at third interview, I would suggest that the word survey itself actually provides a bank of interview questions that really delve deeply into that individual's character. So we would recommend that you would use those interview questions perhaps at sort of the third stage. So just to review that, I would use the job survey questions at round 1 interviews. I would use the job interview guide, which actually is a full hour structured interview if you wanted that, or you can just pick out the relevant questions. It gives a job and gap analysis as well, so that will help you against your benchmark. And then for third round interviews, the word survey questions from the candidate profile.
Yeah, very good, very good. And in relation to the mental agility test, which is another tool that you guys you know, it facilitate, which is excellent. It was one of our clients actually. They were hiring for a finance position, and it was amazing actually, because each of the applicants were well qualified. They were chartered accountants very often with you know, first class honour 2-1 degrees, and I noticed quite a bit of variety actually in the scoring. You know, which was interesting. Would you recommend the mental agility testing for specifically maybe for technical roles, for finance, technology, or is there a particular level maybe where you feel, Joe, that it works best?
The mental agility test is actually really interesting assessment, not least because you know, of course, it gives you a mark out of 50. It's a controlled test,
Yeah,
so you know, you 50 questions, 15 minutes, and really the idea behind it is that if everybody had enough time, everybody would get through it. So
yeah,
what it's checking for is accuracy, and what it's checking for is obviously how many questions you can answer, that speed of thought.
yeah,
My view is that yes, it's perhaps more appropriate for some roles than others, but we do have clients that use them across the board. I think it's a little bit dangerous to put in a benchmark of say 30 out of 50 and apply that across the board, because different roles will require different things.
yeah,
Um, the way we look at that is that actually if somebody scored 30 out of 50 and they actually attempted 30 questions and got all of those right, they've got a high accuracy level,
Yeah.
even if they may not work as quickly as somebody
Yeah.
potentially who also answered 30 questions but attempted 50.
Yeah.
So the report itself can give you some quite interesting information. And some roles require a much higher degree of accuracy than others,
Yeah.
potentially.
Yeah.
So we would recommend that you maybe set a benchmark for the role itself rather than a company-wide benchmark.
Yeah. Very good.
But certainly they are, it is a really, really useful assessment.
Yeah.
And I think a third stage interview can really help to kind of decide between two candidates, depending on what you're actually looking for.
Yeah, very good, very good. And then, and we're sort of delving a little bit into the types then. So you'd mentioned then one or two of the profiles, and maybe the persuader profile, maybe the enthusiast, the people side of things. I mean, would you be of the view that, people maybe on the high social side, that because sometimes it comes down to that alignment in terms of what the business goals are, and then what the individual is seeking, and ideally there's it's a win-win for both parties if everyone's on the same page. Is there a particular technique that you think where you could utilize psychometric testing from an employer perspective as to maybe explaining what the business needs, and then and I don't necessarily mean reasoning with the individual, but just that to get everyone on the same page from an alignment perspective?
I think firstly, as the profile types themselves can vary. You could have somebody who is extremely dominant and a generalist profile, or you could have someone who's tends to be dominant and they could
Yeah.
still be a generalist profile. So I think the strength of trait firstly is something that you would need to focus on. In terms of how traits align with company objectives, that's a little bit more difficult. And the way that we would, in recruitment, we would help with that is that job survey, is that benchmark to define what you're looking for.
Yeah.
But I think across teams, I think you ultimately want a mix of people. I think that means then that you've got all your bases covered. You
Yeah.
have all the same profile types. I think actually that could end up ending in conflict potentially if you've got too many of the same character types working within a team.
Yeah.
So I think you're definitely looking for a mixture. I think where McQuaig really is strong, like I've said before, it is helping the individual to understand themselves better.
Yeah.
And I think then once they do that, they can then understand what value they bring to the company and what the company objectives ultimately are trying to achieve.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, and I think it's because if we look at the environment at the moment, I think like if someone's in a sort of a and they maybe work on their own desk, or say from a recruitment perspective, and your own desk is sort of like a micro business, but then if you're looking to build a culture, you're bringing in new people, there is that probably what people call osmosis, where you sort of learn from being around other people and everything that goes with that. So I think that's sort of a useful piece to consider, to be able to align the business objectives with what the individual is seeking. And I guess it's sort of effective communication, and getting everyone onto the same page on that front.
Yeah, and Paul, I think that really helps, particularly when you're looking at succession planning. I think if you can identify what people are looking for and how well that sits with what the company's trying to achieve, I think that's a real benefit.
Yeah, very good, very good. Brilliant. So Joe, it's been great to chat. Anything we've missed out, or any other sort of tips and tools? I mean, you've been a fount of knowledge for us, and I always appreciate that you're at the other end of the phone. If I've ever a profile that I want to get a second opinion on, I mean, you've outstanding expertise, obviously, in the psychometric assessment area. But anything we've missed today that you thought might be useful to mention?
I think the first thing is, as I hinted at, I think we've all been in extraordinary circumstances, and I think that will put a lot of pressure on people. We've ultimately had to create a high level of resilience. Everybody's had to do that, and I think my advice moving forward would be, that there will be people that again would change, moving back into an office environment, or indeed moving forward and the understanding that actually they're not going to go back into an office full time again is another change. And so I would just encourage that people try to understand each other better and
Yeah.
understand what they're looking for. And I think, certainly my team, we are extremely collaborative.
Yeah.
And sometimes they tell me things I don't want to hear,
Mm.
of course.
Yeah.
But actually, it's good that I've heard them. At least I
Yeah.
have that knowledge. So
Yeah.
yeah, that would be my advice.
And just the final piece then, would you expect when you're rolling out, so I thought the online training worked very well. Am I right in saying that that typically would have been in those, they would have been physical sessions previous to 2020? Or was it a combination that you guys would have run?
So we have always offered online training,
Yeah.
just not as at the same frequency level.
Yeah.
Obviously, we don't have any choice at the moment, and actually, my trainers would say that for level 1 McQuaig, it works really, really well. For
Yeah.
level 2, typically that would have been a full day in the session, being able to
Yeah.
discuss profiles, and so I think as we move out of the pandemic, I think we will look to reschedule level 2,
Yeah.
probably more opportunity for public sessions. But for many businesses and global businesses that we deal with, it's actually been a real advantage.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
our training team do a great job, and they've designed the courses to be interactive, as you said. So
Yeah.
I'm very pleased to hear that certainly you've enjoyed them, Paul, and I will pass on that feedback. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, thanks very much. Yeah, well, it's a funny one. So Michael was saying after, geez, we wouldn't mind, an old trip to the UK, and there's a sort of a social element with that. But no, I mean, I think from a speed perspective in terms of getting stuff done, it's definitely good to have the options. So Joe, where for anyone looking to find you, what's the best way to connect with you if some of our audience are interested in having a conversation?
So you can find me on LinkedIn. My name is Joanna Emmerson. Also, you can call the office or email us. So email address is hello@weareholst.com. Phone number is 0203 111 9292.
Super stuff. So great chat, Joe. Thanks very much for your time.
Well, thanks so much. Take care.